Thanks, folks, for coming back to kind of our second half of our first day of the UW System Sustainability Annual Meeting. This session is, we are joined by Alex Rowe and Pete Davis from UW System. And this session is going to be facilitated and moderated by Chief Sustainability Officer from UW Milwaukee, Kate Nelson. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. This is exciting. This is a chance to take all of the efforts of the work groups around the sustainability professionals around the state and have a deeper discussion with those at the state and at the system level, something we look forward to. And so to start things off, I would like to introduce Maria Redmond, who has been a great partner in arms over the last 2 years. She works for the Department of Administration. Maria is the Director of Sustainability and Clean Energy, with extensive knowledge and experience that we have loved working with. So Maria, first, I am going to turn it over to you to give a highlight of what you and the state have been up to.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate the partnership that I've had with this group and the continued partnership that we'll have over the next few years, hopefully. So I just wanted to kind of, for those who are new and aren't familiar with the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, this office was created in 2019 via Executive Order 38. And really, the office is engaged on various levels of planning. The office was involved in the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change, helping to coordinate all of the recommendations related to that work and coming out with recommendations to address climate change and adapt to and mitigate to climate change. And we also are leading a clean energy planning process as part of our effort too. And really with the idea of reaching 100% carbon-free electricity consumed in the state by 2050, and also figuring out how Wisconsin can contribute to the Paris Accord and the agreement that there's a new nationally determined contribution that Biden announced in April, reducing economy-wide net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. So with these emission reduction goals, we're really looking at the way that Wisconsin can contribute to that and how we can look to ourselves and look to the resources that we have and the things that we can do across multiple sectors to ensure that we're reducing emissions. And in return, for the reduction of emissions and the benefits of that we're seeing healthier Wisconsinites, our natural resources are preserved. We're seeing a growing economy and jobs, and everyone equitably is receiving those benefits. So a lot of the work that we're also doing is focused on environmental justice, climate justice, and equity and diversity. So ensuring that we're keeping that in mind as we're starting to develop our strategies. And so we, as part of the clean energy planning, as part of the Governor's Task Force on Climate Change, there's a set of recommendations, 55 recommendations that were pulled together, and we are now rolling a number of those into the clean energy plan. And as was mentioned this morning, UW and this UW system has a large role to play in that, and not only from the different programs that you run, who you reach out to, the students, the administrative, the curriculum, like you have such a big role to play, but the facilities that you run are a big portion of the state and what the state can do. So we have one of the strategies that I think is really relevant here is the lead by example. And so we have this great opportunity to look at how we transport ourselves, how we use water, how we consume energy, how we purchase goods, and our overall greenhouse gas emissions across the state and state agencies, and what can we do to reduce the amount that we're using and conserve more. And then again, thinking about the social benefits that come from that. And so I really consider the university partners here that I've been working with to be leaders. And I work directly with the governor's office and lieutenant governor's office, the cabinet administration, and talk to them about the great work that the universities are doing, and share these great projects and look for those opportunities where we can partner. And so there's a couple areas looking at greenhouse gas markets, social cost of carbon. One of the things I've been trying to do with the university is understand the process of new projects and how you get through the process from beginning to end, so that I can fully understand where the barriers are and the things that we can work on and collaborate on, and ensure that you're not facing those barriers. Being innovative and looking at new technologies and how do we incorporate our long-term goals and carbon reduction goals into planning processes that are more short-term. And so I'm here as a liaison with DFD and the other agencies, hoping to elevate the work that you're doing and ensure that we're connecting the dots and there's alignment and that you can get the work done. So I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm glad, like I said before, I'm super honored to have the opportunity to work with you all. You're all doing great work, and I'm excited about what we can do in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria. And just on that note, please jump into any of these questions as well that we've prepared for UW Systems, so that your perspective is a little bit of a different angle. So I will turn it over. We have prepared some questions for Alex Rowe and Pete Davis that they have, but I would love for Alex and Pete for you to introduce yourselves first.
Kate, I'll introduce myself and Pete can, but can I ask Maria some questions?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so just so you know, I'm Alex Rowe. I am I have this massive title, Senior Associate Vice President for Capital Planning and Budget. Yeah, okay, it's a mouthful. Or as the president says, whatever he gives me to do. And so my team does the capital budgeting, the capital planning, project delivery, real estate, and again, whatever the president thinks I should be working on. Pete?
Pete Davis, mechanical engineer in the capital planning and budget office, kind of the lead engineer. I basically do engineering planning with the campuses, and I do whatever Alex tells me to do.
And I am an architect, and Pete is an engineer, so we might not come at the problem from the same direction. Just so you know. So Maria, I'm going to be honest with you here, and even though I'm being recorded, I've just spent an hour on the phone with Laura Larson, who's been a great partner with us, But one of the challenges that we have with DFD is they're sort of, how do I put this politely? Their metrics for green projects and sustainability have been watered down, even though we have a supportive governor. We used to have LEED as our mandate, right? And I realized we all had sort of very different rules under the previous governor, and we couldn't do that, but we don't have that problem now. And so DFT has adopted the AIA code standards, which is probably fine, but it doesn't have the teeth. It doesn't have the verification. It doesn't have all of its certification. See, they're all nodding. That our students and our sustainability people want. How do we get you to bridge that? I go back to innovative technologies. We have a project sitting in front of DFD right now where I have an institution that wants to look at some innovative technologies. I can't get that study off dead center, Eau Claire. And so I had a conversation with Kevin Trinacci just this week. So I guess what I'm saying is how do we work with you more closely? Because our DFD partners are very reluctant, right? And I understand they've given me the lectures about blah, blah, blah. But this is our future. And we really would love it if we could figure out how to talk to them, because they're not quite on the same page. And I'm just being honest, and I'll get fired for this, but I'm just being honest. And all of the people on the grid here probably have 5 times more energy about do the right thing than I do. How do we get that dialogue going in a productive way? I realize we're going to be bleeding edge, we're going to be out in front, but we're the University of Wisconsin, we ought to be, right? frankly.
Totally agree.
We ought to be doing research on this. We ought to be involving students. I mean, all of that stuff. So how can you help us with them, please?
Yes, and I'm like, yes, I totally agree. And this is something that I've been trying to navigate through too, without being like having the governor's office kind of jump at DFD. I've been trying to create more of a collaborative environment so that we can talk to DFD, and I'm not getting very far myself, as many we have checked
Time to bring out the big guns.
Yeah, so one of the things I've been contemplating is starting with the DOA Secretary's office and basically putting together a summary of all of the different, projects that are kind of held up in one way, shape, or form that DFD needs to take a look at or has a decision point on. And that's why one of the things I've been trying to do also is to get more engaged on some of the, like with Stephen's point, get more engaged on some of the projects and like from start to finish, so I can see where the disconnects are, just so I'm coming at it with, because I'm an outsider coming in and telling DFD like, hey, I think you need to change or be more forward thinking or this. I don't have the authority to have them change, right? So I have the ability to go to the Secretary's office and to the governor's office and say that the processes that are in place are not conducive to the goals that we have in place. And so kind of being more constructive and getting that list at the Secretary's office, I've already informed of the challenges. I'm just trying to put a comprehensive list together of some of the things that are held up. And then I meet with the governor's office every week and give them updates. And this is one of the things I wanted to, get through this particular meeting and bring it up again constructively to them and say, while we have the sustainability and design guidelines, I agree, they've been watered down to a certain extent, or the minimal, from what I've heard, it's the minimal sustainability guidelines, and they're helpful. While they're helpful and while it's a great tool, like there could be a lot more there. And so the other thing would be, I would say, is if that tool is useful to you, like suggesting an update to the tool to make it more forward thinking and going through another process with DFD and have you engaged in that process to be able to provide the feedback on the updates that would be useful to you. So there's a couple of different angles. Is one, getting that list of projects, which I have a few of them already, but getting like where the challenge areas are. And then two, bringing to life the sustainability design guidelines and updating them and getting, some key leadership within this group to be able to participate and provide some feedback and like a focus group on those guidelines to provide some input so that it would be more forward thinking.
That would be great, Maria. And I hate to ask you to bring out the big guns and go around DFD, but Pete and I have been around the merry-go-round on the Eau Claire project now for the last month or two. And, I understand the reluctance if you're a technical person, but until we begin to do these analyses and we begin to do the studies where we look at the things that the institution is interested in, how do we know if they're good or bad ideas, right? I mean, and you need to let us investigate these things. We're willing to put money on the table to do it. And that's what you want the university to do. You want the university to trailblaze through some of these things. I know the technical issues. I can understand that, but until you really bring someone in to help us go through all of that, it's hard to know if those technical barriers are really just a reluctance because it's new or different, right? Look, we got rid of coal. I can't even begin to tell you how hard that was. I can't begin to tell you how many meetings I had to have with President Cross, who was convinced we should not get rid of coal, by the way. Because it was cheap, Alex. It's cheap, Alex. It's cheap, Alex. People die mining coal, sir. It's cheap, Alex. It's cheap, Alex. It took me 3 meetings to get him to agree to give up coal. And then I couldn't even use those words. I had to talk about plant optimization. Okay, whatever. It doesn't matter. We got it done, right? But now I'm back at sort of a new point now where, the institutions have ideas. They'd like them investigated. They'd like to figure out how to do them. Some of these have merit, some of them don't. but gosh, if we can't study them, how do we know, right? And I've tried, I mean, again, Pete and I have been trying here. I feel like I'm talking to a wall, and they're very sympathetic. Don't get me wrong. They got it, but they won't move the dime.
Yeah.
So I think Eau Claire thinks I'm not paying attention. We are paying attention. So, you know, so, okay, I'll stop now.
No, I think it's a really great point. And what I would just encourage, like if you could send, and I'm happy to throw my email in there, but if you could,
I'll have Pete send you the Eau Claire thing. Absolutely.
yeah, I have Eau Claire's. I have Eau Claire's.
Okay, so you understand. Okay, good.
I understand the issue there, but if there are others and other examples, I would like to aggregate those examples, because the more that we have, the more just the more justification
Sure.
around, I think,
Sure.
and if it's happening at, I know it's happening at multiple institutions. So sending those to me as soon as you feasibly can, because I can bring it to leadership and just say that something is not working here. I've tried to have this conversation. I think giving those examples, getting that conversation going will help expedite some action. So.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, sure. This is great. I mean, that is the kind of dialogue we're looking for here today. So yeah, we have, I want to get through a few questions and then leave time at the end for a full dialogue with everybody. So I will kick this off, and forgive me, I have to switch screens and I'm only on a laptop, but just to kick us off with some basics to our work here. Most campuses report sustainability efforts through the National STARS program. Many of the credits relate back to state planning and policy. How could system help track data and bring consistent measurement that campuses could use for their reporting? Could system help showcase the reports and their content at a higher level?
So are you asking us to aggregate the data? What exactly are you after here?
So there is a working group on the STARS platform, and they've been very productive. They help share information, and there's a lot of things with the state of Wisconsin that are similar answers for all of us. So sometimes it would be helpful for system to help us look at that and then perhaps raise the reports to another level. I will actually let Alex jump in here if he would like. He is the chair of that work group. Sorry to put you on the spot, Alex.
Yeah.
Better you than me.
other Alex here. Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty well. We've thus far been focused on very campus specific type things, like how do we just find opportunities to collaborate and do better. I think we also realize that we're all collecting similar information and similar data just about our campuses. Maybe there is an opportunity to either aggregate that just to showcase it at a system level, or to think about ways to how to do it more efficiently across system. So that's the kind of the idea that we're starting to explore, and interested in your thoughts around whether that's useful, beneficial, or how that could be supportive.
So I think somebody else said in the chat, there are hurdles that need system support. Gosh. Okay. So I don't have a quick and easy answer probably to any of your questions, but I would say, I think if we could get our arms around understanding exactly what the timelines of those things are and what you would need from us, I could probably, I hate to do this, but it's like a duck and weave, but I think it's difficult. Yeah. Do you have an example? And you could send that to me at another time where we could start to look at it. It's helpful to understand, what's the scale of this, and then what the timelines are, right?
I'll maybe jump in real quick just to take a stab at kind of the tangible ask. A lot of times when we're collecting data on STARS regarding UW system policy or practice, we're reading on the website and taking a guess as to what's updated, who the contacts are. We've had this issue with getting access for other people to our own website page on the sustainability site, where we don't really know who to talk to and don't always get a response. So that piece of a staff member that we can go to help us navigate the staffing infrastructure at system would be really helpful as far as tangible asks for STARS related data. If we can verify things or dig into a little bit more detail, I think sometimes that's going to be a helpful way to make sure that our reporting is accurate and comprehensive.
Okay, all right. I'm going to do a lot of taking notes and asking questions and maybe not answering them today. Okay.
That's totally fine. I think this is a pretty deep dive, so I can totally expect that.
Okay.
Our next question isn't typically something that I've turned to system at, but it might be more DOA, but it's really worth asking, especially with the staffing we have these days. State assets are handled through campus surplus operations, some of which report through campus sustainability offices. How could UW system provide support for streamlined and shared asset management? This will result in better resource sharing, compliance, and communication.
So, Kate, what kind of asset management are you talking about? Because asset management means a lot of things to a lot of different people.
We're talking about the typical surplus materials, your computers, your desks, your chairs,
You're talking about surplus items.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Boy, whoever figures that out, just let me know. Just kidding. I'm serious, actually. We have that problem here at System Office, believe it or not, because SWAP doesn't like to take stuff anymore. But I don't know that there's a centralized solution to that, because I think it's all considered individually, but I'm happy to hear dissenting views on that. It would not come through my office. And it probably wouldn't be a sustainability issue. It would probably end up in the procurement risk guys area.
I was going to add that.
Strange.
I was going to add it's probably more in the procurement area, because that's typically where I've seen, the end of life policies that are usually through procurement. And to back up Alex, our office in Madison is full of surplus items laying around that we have sitting around. But so that's kind of where that one lies. If that group wants to talk a little bit more about what that would look like, we can.
And I would say, Maria, this might be an area that DOA could be helpful, because there's SWAP and there's all kinds of other things, but I don't know what the state's policies are on. Look, computer equipment is very different than a desk, right? And all of these things have sort of different recycle options and not recycle options, and selling and buying and whatever, right? And all of that. And a lot of this is state driven. And, if there needs to be an update to the state in terms of how it deals, not with the university, not just with the university, but with the state of Wisconsin, right? I mean, what do you do with the old metal furniture that SWAP doesn't want, right? What do you do with that old computer, which probably has things in it that can't be recycled or are considered hazardous, right? And some of these policies come from the state of Wisconsin and not necessarily the university. That would be another area where we could use some clarity.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, like, it would be helpful to have an understanding of, and I'm just so you all are aware, I'm hiring a lead by example person that can help us with all of this, but understanding what statutory authority the state has, and where there's like local governance, like where you as a university can take it further, like stretch it out. So I think it'd be super helpful to understand like what sort of governance DOA has in this. And then we can, map it out a little bit more to see where there's some flexibility or where there's room for improvement. But that's not something that I know about yet. So I will openly admit I don't know what authority DOA has on what.
So I just want to quickly jump in. So this suggestion kind of came out of our working group, in the sense that at the university level, we have our own software, and all the other universities have a different software, of course, because why not? So that complicates a lot of things. So the idea that we were proposing was that if your asset management and surplus software was all the same system, then a university entity would be able to first manage its own processes better, so that they could take a surplus property, instead of hauling it all the way to a swap location, actually haul it from building to building. So actually have like a virtual marketplace where you have tiers of let's use it internally. Then if we can't use it internally, what other state agency could utilize this material, utilize these assets, right? So then the next tier is, and that's where if everyone's using the same software program, it would be a lot easier to manage. And the idea was if we started with the UW system universities, that would be the pilot study that we could see whether or not that it was effective or not, just because of the amount of material that we go through. And then the idea was then you can go, statewide. And I see this problem even within our university between our unions or housing. They're using different asset management software. So if anything, it's an opportunity that we see of saving time and saving money.
Asset management software, that is a tricky conversation. So is anybody from Madison here? Yeah, you have a completely different system than all other 12. That's problem number one. And you are never going to change your system. And the investment to change all 12 is very high. So that's our challenge, right? Is to have one system across the 13 when Madison's got a system, right? And they just upgraded their work order system, right? To Asset Work. So you just changed your work order system over there. So I don't quite know how to do this when we have a system at Madison. I think one or two else of you are on a different system. Then you're all different. And that would require a massive reinvestment to standardize that across the institutions. I'm not saying it's not a goal that we shouldn't have, but alone the Madison investment is millions and millions of dollars. That's our challenge. Certainly what you're requesting would facilitate not just what you're proposing, but other things. But Pete, tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, aren't we looking at 12 different instances of TMA?
Well, it depends on what, because it depends on the campus, what they're using for asset management, and in as far as if it's the facility kind of end, or if that's tied into their stores or what have you, or if that's something that's a completely different software piece. But what I'm gathering from this conversation is that there is part of it, there is policy and how a desk, let's say, finds its way out the door, and it's almost like what we're looking at is that being something that's a little bit more streamlined, because I know it's very difficult right now. It's like, well, I have this desk, I know I'm supposed to offer it to other people, I know I'm supposed to do this and this and this with it, but it's difficult to do because nobody's connected. And am I hearing that right? That's kind of so I would go back to being the reason why I know about it is that facilities management director, we had a surplus program until, well, I don't know what they're doing down there now, but that was in my area. So but that's kind of I've made myself a sticky note. It was kind of in that realm of things in the purchasing, and I'm gonna, at the risk of Alex firing me, to throw it out there, the danger part is that that there is that autonomy now. I liked my surplus program because it was a nice little operation for me to help the campus and to get rid of things. It was difficult. We had some challenges and storage and different things, but it was a nice little program that paid for itself. It was just nice, and you run the risk of it suddenly being taken away and suddenly being a centralized thing, and then you're left trying to manage. So that'd be my only cautionary tale, I guess. But maybe that group, let me think about that, and I'll talk to Alex offline about maybe where that group can be pointed to talk to at system as opposed to us.
And there might be non-software options here in terms of what Travis is proposing, which is that everyone is linked together. I mean, maybe there has to be another kind of robust communication endeavor. But gosh, I would hope that Madison would, at least internally. I mean, I'm staring at 4 new buildings at your campus. That's a lot of new desks, right? I got a storeroom in the basement full of new desks. They'd love to send them over to your place, and not have them go off to the dump, right? I mean, so you're right. There does need to, if we really want to be serious about sustainability, we do need to find a better way to reuse what should be reused, and to adequately recycle or demolish what isn't reusable, right? All right, Pete, sorry.
Sorry, Kate, I was just going to jump in just to reinforce that point. You know, sustainability, people talk to each other, facilities directors talk to each other, procurement managers talk to each other all across the system. I'm not getting the sense that surplus people do. They used to, but they don't now. And Eileen from system coordinated a lot of that surplus conversation. So that I think is maybe the starting point for this.
That's the link that we don't have anymore. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, and Eileen's, I think that her appointment was waste. So it was,
Correct.
Yeah, solid waste research grant. Yeah, that was
Yeah, when she retired out, they didn't replace her. Yeah. That's a risk position, by the way. That's why I punt kicked it to them, but we'll go back and chat with Angela.
This is great. And as someone who has handled surplus at the start of my position, it's been fundamental to sustainability at UWM. So, and we have lots of dust to share because there's a lot of remodeling going on around UWM. A lot. Our next question, getting a little deeper here. Campus sustainability efforts not only work to mitigate greenhouse gases in order to reduce the impacts of climate change, but they also work to adapt to the current climate hazards of climate change. What role or support could UW system play in resilience planning that many campuses are engaging in?
You want to start? I'll follow.
So when we talk resiliency planning, and I'm going to make an assumption of what we're discussing. We're talking about mitigating the risks that climate change has on our physical infrastructure, and operations in general. And so, you know, a lot of what we do in capital planning and budget, you know, that's brought up through the campus planners, and the projects that they want to do come up through the facilities group and the campus planners group, and come to us, and we compile and we create capital budget, the capital budget out of that. So within that process, you know, at this time, there's not really, that's kind of the one way for folks. And I don't know what campuses are working on doing resiliency planning. I know that I didn't necessarily do that myself, as well as I should, but you know, I guess kind of 2 points is to kind of see a little bit more detail as to what's wanted to be seen there, and now projects that would be developed are developed up through the campus planning offices. And the last point I'd have is that, you know, a lot of resiliency planning rolls into risk management and rolls into that office. And I don't know right now where either DOA, Bureau of State Risk Management, or our own risk management, where they stand on resiliency planning exactly. And then that is a good question. I guess I'm not sure. If Dusty's on there, I know of some places I'd like to fix on his campus, but.
So I would follow along, Kate, and say, we have not revisited the Board of Regents criteria for the capital plan in a couple of years, right? And one of the ways to begin to show our demonstrated commitment to that is to incorporate some amount of sustainability into those Board of Regent requirement categories, right? We can't probably get there officially for this capital budget because the capital budget is due next Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And so the forms,
I'm well aware.
yeah, so the forms are out there, everybody's freaking out. So I can't do anything about that. But what we can pledge to do is exactly what you asked, which is that we would begin to investigate how that might become a player or a component of, or an evaluation piece of future capital budgets, right? We do it through the energy conservation program, but we don't do it in the majors. And I would say you're dead on. We ought to, having just had a conference call over the engineering building at Madison and the all glass exterior wall, which they want to convince me is going to be energy efficient. So I think that's something that we at the system level can do. We can begin to have conversations with the board. I will tell you the board is changing, as you can imagine. I'll just be very careful here. It's converting from one kind of board to another. And we'll see more of that by the end of May. And we see more and more regions concerned about this. We just haven't seen interest or concern at the region level. They were all back at, why do you need to get rid of coal? And so part of this is we have to educate the board and transition the board to understand that this should be a key component of how we look at projects. And then if they aren't going to be sustainable and we aren't going to design them that way, and they aren't going to be either contributing to net zero or carbon neutral or whatever path we pick, that they don't rank as high, right? That they ought to be sent back and reconsidered. I would also tell you that a lot of that has to do with you guys locally getting your, and I know it's an uphill struggle, getting your chancellors to understand how critical this is to the students and the earth, right? And if you can make that connection, then the chancellors are going to champion projects to come forward that have sustainability components, right? And metrics that need to be met. That's helpful to us. I mean, we can do some things from the top, but if I go back to that word that Pete used, every chancellor likes to be autonomous. And so we really need there to be a buy-in at the local level, because if we get to a budgetary scramble and we have to pick between A and B, and A is non-sustainable and B is sustainable, and there's a budget problem, you can guess where the conversation goes, right? So it has to be a collaborative effort. And I know that's very hard, and you guys are working really hard at that. I understand that. But we can go to a certain degree, but it also requires the institution to want to do this. Does that make sense?
It does, and it helps to hear you say it like that, because we don't want our efforts, and I'm speaking very generally, to get through all of that and then hit another barrier. You know, we need to know that that work can pay off at another level. But you're right, it has to come from both areas, and that's exactly why we wanted this kind of dialogue to happen.
Look, I'm the person in the office who recycles her paper towels, right? I mean, I'm one of those creepy, weird people.
Well, there's going to be a lot of questions kind of along this same line, and probably to your answer, but the climate task force that Maria was leading, the report shares the means for the state to lead by example on energy. How can UW System work with Maria's office and the campus sustainability offices to deliver on the items in the report and lead on the energy transition for Wisconsin? The Clean Energy Plan is also close to being released. There are many ways to build this connection. Kind of built on what you were already asking Maria earlier, but.
I lost Pete. Where is he?
I'm here. I'm
okay.
here. So yeah, I'm interested in seeing the Clean Energy Plan when it's released or something, and I'll talk to more with Maria about some of these things as what we can do to lead by example. But I think you know, as we go forward, there's a like a multitude of different ways we have to look at energy for the state and for the system especially. And you know, Eau Claire is a great example of a project where we're starting to do some things. We're starting to study some alternatives to just the what is the term it's the business as usual. And then also, you know, one of the things that I'm taking on is starting to look at, you know, our thermal utilities and our plants and what is the next phase of those systems? What's the next life coming down the road for those? So I think it's this continued dialogue, a lot of it, and we kind of go from there and work together to make sure that we're putting forth plans and ideas that are both sustainable and operational for our campus, or there's something they're able to do essentially. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'd like to see more information from Maria on that, the Clean Energy Plan stuff going forward.
I'd be happy to meet with you and check in on the Clean Energy Plan and just give you some more background and kind of walk you through what the lead by example looks like, and just kind of figure out and where the University of Wisconsin system is cited throughout the document, just so that you can kind of see that. And then I was going to say something else, but it totally left me, so I'm just going to stop there.
Well, and on top of right now, we have only certain tools to enact some of these projects, and that's one of the challenges we have too. I think this was alluded to in one of the earlier sessions. It's projects like this that maybe purely energy type projects are competing with the projects that are putting roofs on buildings. And right now, our mechanism for getting some of our energy projects done is really through these energy dollars that are paid for, the program revenue supported borrowing paid for by campus energy savings. So that, in that program run by DFD through a consultant, Franklin Energy that has criteria involved in it, sometimes difficult to meet. And it also has kind of the wherever Franklin and DOA kind of wants to focus their energies sometimes. So it's finding both the plans and kind of the ideas and the directions we want to go, and then finding the mechanisms to essentially look at making those things happen. I heard just anecdotally, and this would mean nothing to anyone that doesn't do anything with STEAM, but I just thought it was a really interesting thing I heard yesterday is that, and Tony would appreciate this, is that I heard facilities development talk about not using concrete box conduit for steam lines in the future, looking at lower cost alternatives. I'm like, oh my goodness, because what that means for this is we convert what we do for energy, what we use for energy distribution on campuses, or either local distribution or wide range distribution. Before, there was such a huge investment in that. It cost a fortune. So folks are very hesitant about change because I've got, $100 million in the ground. Well, now if we're looking at alternative ways of delivering that energy in the meantime, that means that maybe at some point that investment may not be as sunk for as long if we need to convert and change as we move forward to something different, whatever that different is. I think
Well, you're on mute, Alex.
Maria, that's a great point that Pete raises. The funding mechanisms for kind of some of these projects isn't really there at the sort of state of Wisconsin level. I mean, we've got the energy conservation program, but I'm not really sure that's doing what we would want it to do. And is there another program that the state could stand up that would these kinds of projects fit in, right? They're not necessarily about energy conservation. They're more about how do we reduce, and if you don't want to use the word climate control, we can go back to promoting resiliency, right? There are lots of words we can use that say the same thing as sustainability has. We're happy to help you wordsmith. It's probably 20 people on here would be happy to help you wordsmith that. That there are ways that it doesn't seem as scary by using the word climate change or climate or whatever. There are ways we can categorize that program so that it could provide dollars that don't compete with the roof money and the window money and the and the generator money and the chiller money and all the other things that all the physical plant directors on this call are like cringing over. But it's another category of a way for us to begin to address these issues, whether we can address them, because there's just not enough deferred maintenance to go around. How does the state then begin to develop a program that allows us and other state agencies to be more forward thinking?
Dave, I see your hand up. Did you disappear, Dave?
You're on mute.
Sorry. I just wanted to come back to Pete's point earlier too about some of these energy conservation programs, and they're talking about energy conservation, but it's also very much a simple return on investment metric. And I think that's another thing that just to put out in this conversation, I think needs some real consideration when we're talking about long-term planning and what our goals are. It shouldn't always be that if it doesn't meet 16.01 years, that it's not a valuable project. Sometimes a project at 22 years is entirely valuable, especially if the warranty or guarantee on a product you're using is 25 years. And so I think we need to be looking at that too in terms of how we evaluate some of these programs, about what we're actually prioritizing as the important aspects of our return on investment versus, for Tony's sake here, the social cost of carbon, and how that impacts other externalities that aren't just calculated in a budget line item.
Dave, you're leading me into my next question.
Well, I think Missy's got one question before you get to go
Oh,
there.
sure. Got it. I see.
I'm sorry, that might be a segue, but it's about how if we design for energy efficiency, that sometimes we create additional problems and costs elsewhere in the institution. And I always use the example of when we put in lighting, that we're creating additional accommodation requests because it's impacting the health and welfare of our students and faculty and staff. So incorporating human metrics in correlation with our building performance metrics will help us all out, because then when we're not placing the cost and the burden onto our learning environments and then just forcing the institution to set up a whole nother program to deal with the consequences of not looking at these things holistically. I'm done.
Right, so to pivot off of Dave and to go at something this group has talked about quite a bit in the last year. Long-term planning is essential to be prepared for climate change. How does the science-based goals on mitigating climate change affect capital planning? How will the social cost of carbon be utilized in these decisions moving forward?
So I would say back to what I talked about a little bit earlier about Regent priorities and Regent criteria. So I would put back on you, if you could devise a way to evaluate that question. So say we had a question on the capital budget worksheet, which we have a lot of them, and it said, what are blah, 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 blah. If you could put together what the question would be and what you thought the evaluation metrics would be, that would be incredibly useful to Pete and I. Let's hear from you guys, because the social carbon is really tricky. But if you as a team could come back to me and say, we'd like this question, and we think these are the ways that, this is 100% yes, and that would be useful, because then Pete and I've got something to look at, right? Because it's clearly something you've spent a lot of time thinking about, right?
That is a welcome response, because just knowing that you would have the ears for that and know where it fits into your process is fantastic. And on behalf of everyone, I accept that challenge. If I can, that's wonderful.
I mean,
Yes.
I would want to know from you as a group collectively what you would view as positive and negative answers, right? I mean, rather than me making it up and then you telling me my metrics suck. So I rather this was a team effort.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. And back to Missy's point about the human side, back to the resiliency points.
I would say the human
cost.
side is something, we have started to use the WELL program, right? Which is another sort of evaluation, right? Which the hospital world started with, healthcare started with long before us. And it really has more to do with interior spaces, right? But to Missy's point, it has to do with colors and feeling and textures and lighting, and we've tried to get DOA to adopt that. We're having some mixed reactions with that, because clearly we've swung the pendulum so far that we've sort of overlooked how people would operate in the space. We know natural light has impacts. There are lots of stuff. I mean, so how do we use the research to not go so far that I have this perfectly energy conservative building I can't see in? Well, I know you guys can't tell, but I don't turn my lights on. My little eyes at my age don't like the fluorescent lights, right? I'm old. Some of you are way too young to be there yet, but I'm at a point where that thing with my computer, it hurts. So, but I'm my age, right? A 20-year-old has a different set of eyes. And so how do we balance all these things, right? And we can get to the point where we make the building so energy conservative. I use Eau Claire Science Building as an example. The HVAC system doesn't function because we did all these energy conservation measures and now the building is terrible. So you're right, Missy, we can go too far.
Excellent. Here's on a different note. Back to Eileen. UW System used to have some administration support for campus sustainability efforts when Eileen Norby was here. Are there new ways that UW System could support our communications and annual meetings?
So I admit we did used to have a staff member. Oh my God, those were the good days. I did have a brief conversation with administration yesterday. I had a brief conversation. Conversations with the president are brief. Pete and I will go back and ask for a position. We do have an org chart out that would have an energy and sustainability person that's on our to-do list. We don't have the funding for it or the FTE, but we know this is an incredibly important thing. I think all of you are well aware the board is in the process of hiring a new president. And we expect that hire will get announced sometime in the spring of next year and show up next summer. And I mean, I can't say for certain because I don't know who the new president's going to be, but most of them are going to want to look at this issue, right? This is a really critical issue, in particular for our students. And so if we're not successful in getting a position now, Pete and I would keep at it. So what we'll commit to you is that we'll ask for the permission for the staffer. I don't know where we'll get with it, but we will ask and commit that if we don't get anywhere, we'll ask again when we get a new president. And that's the best I can do, other than all of your chancellors calling the president and telling him I need this person. That would be helpful too. That's how things work around here. So I'm just being honest with you guys. We're willing to ask, but it will come down to what the administration of the university here wants to do. I'm not the final arbiter.
So my final question goes more directly at the position, but what I'd rather do is kind of open it up to Dave. He's been leading our work group. I've been on and several others about what a position looks like. And it's not always just a facilities and capital planning type of position. So Dave, I want to kind of open it up to you a little bit to share with Alex and Pete at this time the work that the group has been doing. And perhaps there's some materials we can help feed you that we've looked at to justify this kind of thing. You're on the spot, Dave.
That's how I like to be, right there, ready to go. So I think a lot of this information Pete has already heard today. So he was generous enough to be in our working group talking about the position. I think, you know, for the most part, when our group has met, one of the main areas of focus is that we believe this position to be most valuable when it's holistic in its approach to sustainability. So when we're looking at EDI related issues, when we're looking at the academic exposure around sustainability, when we're looking at operations, when we talk about procurement, and we sort of see that this is a multifaceted position where we need someone who, you know, in a perfect world is going to be able to do some of the physical and tangible things that we need done as a system around like planning the meeting and communication and doing the sort of outreach to keep us moving forward. But we also need someone who can provide goal setting, who can work in a collaborative nature to bring in other departments across not only the system, but the state. I think this is really where we start to want to mix it up. I know in conversations with Maria, she's talked about the desire to see a sustainability related professional in every government organization or department that we have. And so being able to try and find someone who can really operate at a high level, I think, Alex, hearing you talk about, well, it's going to depend on how the Board of Regents goes and what they need. And it's like, I totally understand that. And at the same point, I mean, I think this is where our group has struggled is we want that voice at the table. We need that voice at the table, someone who can operate talking to the Board of Regents, someone who can have those short conversations with the president and say, hey, this is what we need to do. And then who can liaise with Maria and her office to talk about how we can really fill that LBE role. So I think getting somebody who's an energy specialist and can help in the short term is great. It's, I think any of us who can remember Eileen and work with her, miss her dearly. And the role that she provided. And the landscape is also changing as such that, we look at ourselves, we're definitely competitive with one another as individual institutions, but I think we also see a rising tide lifts all boats. And when we get together once a month and talk about this, we're working as a collaborative, and we see ourselves working to challenge other state systems across the country. So University of California system, University of New York, the University of Maryland system. Like, these are all places that are putting this as a forefront for recruitment and retention and bringing students in. And, you've got us as a hodgepodge group of do-gooders trying to do what we need, somebody who's focused on this 40 hours a week, 50 some weeks a year trying to get this done. And I'm uber excited to just see hands going up, because that means people got a lot to say. So I'll shut up and let the others take it away.
I'll let Peter or Alex comment on Dave before I take some hands, if there's anything you want to add or say.
I held the planner job at the University of Connecticut for more than 5 years, and the sustainability team worked for me. And both the permitting side and the more sustainable activity side, I think where most of you are. And he had one foot in the door with me and one foot in the door with the provost. Because quite frankly, a lot of it had to do with, what we were doing academically, right? Which is where the students want to be, right? They want to be in both camps. So that is an option that if I bring a position forward, that I would share it with the academic side. Because it really does tie back then into the mission of the institution, and how students are, we are talking the talk and walking the walk, right? I mean, I run for those of you who know, I run the DOE Green Ribbon School process, because when I wasn't looking, the academics pitched it back to me. Would have been nice if it stayed with the academics, because I sort of felt like that was good, right? Kept them in our camp, but Lord knows when I wasn't paying attention, it ended up in my, now I will tell you, I make 5 of them review the documents. So I think there are ways where we could start to cross some of those barriers, Dave, because I think a true sustainability strategic thinker has to be in a lot of different camps, right? I work primarily in the physical world, but it's not just about the physical world. It is about connecting students learning and living the right thing, right? And so that would be a piece of this if we could make it go. I don't know whether that makes it easier to sell or harder to sell. It's hard to know up there. I'll stop now.
Excellent. I see a hand from Wes, Travis, and Tony, and I don't know which ones are new. So
I think Wes was first.
okay, well, I'll just go on in a row that I see in front of me. All right, Wes.
Yeah, mine will be quick, and most of my comments I've been trying to keep is being realistic about some incremental changes that could probably occur. And behind every good Eileen, there's also Greta. Greta was the graduate assistant that worked for Eileen, and she provided a lot of that administrative functionality. And obviously at that point, you're not looking at FTE, you're just looking at seeing if there's additional capacity or budget somewhere. So having a position like that reports up to what would be a logical connection point, in the interim, someone like Pete obviously is a conduit for us to have high level conversations, but then also some ability for us to be able to offload a little bit of this administrative burden we've been trying to carry, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, over the last several years, just as another, way of building a ramp towards a higher level or deeper level position.
Thanks, Wes. That's a really good point. As we know in our own offices, it takes more than one individual to really get the job done. Travis?
So I heard from Alex that if we want to actually make this position happen, that if we have a letter and we have each one of our chancellors sign it, that has the better opportunity of having this position be successful or actually being there. So I think, can we give that a try as a task to do?
Yes, as the chair, I will gladly volunteer Nathan to help us write that. and we'll get it around to folks.
I would say yes too, just from Milwaukee's point of view. I feel like that wouldn't be a tough thing to ask our chancellor right now.
And you guys tie it back to your academic mission, your vision, what you're trying to do. It's not always about climate change, but it is about the notion that we as an educational institution are training the generation to go out behind us. And if we don't not only operate that way and work that way, we're not fulfilling the mission of the university. It's not just about the physical and all of the coordination and everything you guys need, but it is about the big picture, which is this is the right thing to do, because this is what we need to do to make the university act and talk and walk like it's supposed to for the state of Wisconsin, right?
If I can just jump in quickly, I mean, I'll echo what our chancellor said this morning in his welcome address, right? Like, and as Alex just said, we are, as institutions training the next generation. And we need to, I think, be, living our values and putting our investment behind our values and those kinds of things. So I think, I would certainly agree. I will start meeting with our chancellor's cabinet monthly. This will be the first thing on my list next week to him, is supporting this position.
There's so much out there. There's mental health. I mean, just if you guys know what each of your teams and your leadership are dealing with, you're unfortunately one more voice in that crowd, right?
And I would add that what you're doing plays a big role in what we're trying to accomplish statewide. And without the work that you're doing, we miss out on. There's what we continue to talk about is the cost of inaction as it relates to health, the economy. I work for there's just so much to it that I think if you can build into the impact that your work and this position would have and help coordinating the expeditious process of getting stuff done. And I don't know, I just feel like tying it to the statewide work would be super helpful too. Sorry, Tony, your hand was raised. I totally jumped in. Sorry about that.
Tony.
Thanks. Maybe I'm a little different than a lot of this group, because over the last few weeks and months, I've been doing things like writing up project budget worksheet, cost estimates, and doing capital project requests write-ups as part of the whole budget and planning process. And one of the things that I think about when I'm putting that kind of information together is, these are all requests for a lot of money. I mean, this is a lot of money, $1 million chunks, $3 million, $5 million, $7 million chunks of money. And I want to make sure that we have conversations about not investing in assets that are going to get stranded when we come to the conclusion that we need to do something different 15, 20 years down the road. Most of our campuses have climate commitments to be carbon neutral by 2050. I won't say all of them, but most of our campuses have that commitment. Yet that's a local commitment, and we realize that local action is how we can get to where we need to get to. And Alex, you and Pete both have been involved in a number of these conversations, but the fact that right now, 3/4 of the energy, on average, 3/4 of the energy, not necessarily 3/4 of the cost, but 3/4 of the energy that we use on our campuses is for heating. And it comes in the form of burning fossil fuels to create steam to distribute through our campuses. That is not sustainable. And it's not consistent with these other climate goals that are, simple and obvious, and to many people still feel like they're a long ways out there. So the only point that I was trying to make is that we have a pretty good idea what a solution different options for solutions would look like over time. But the big thing that I'm concerned about is that as we do our capital planning, each of these cycles, we have we run the risk of stranding more assets. Something as simple as designing a heating system in a building for distribution hot water temperatures that are consistent with high efficiency heat pump systems, high efficiency heat pump geo exchange systems, which is the only technically feasible way of electrifying and decarbonizing our solution. So I could get into the weeds and I'll stop doing that, but I'm curious about your thoughts, Pete, especially, and Alex, about this idea of pushing back on projects that are going to strand assets by designing for systems that need to proliferate a steam fossil fuel-based distribution system, generation and distribution system, as opposed to trying to say, okay, incrementally, we need to start offloading our steam plants, because we can't, unless we have some other funding mechanisms, which we also should be talking about and looking at, but unless we say we're going to come up with a couple $100 million for each campus to convert from steam to heat pump based hot water and chilled water distribution, we have to do it incrementally. And to do it incrementally, it's more palatable if we don't strand assets that we just spent a few $1 million on. That was more of a speech than a question, and I apologize.
No, and I guess that goes back to like what I mentioned before, is that I was really excited to start hearing that. I don't disagree, Tony. We don't want to spend a bunch of money on something that is going to go, has a life that's shorter than. We don't want to have stranded investment. And I think one of the things that I'm committed to doing is looking at our heating plants and looking at pushing back a little bit, saying no, we don't necessarily need to make the plants bigger arbitrarily, but look at ways that we start thinking about what those things look like in the future and studying that instead of studying how we make them larger. Because you're right. I mean, we were off coal, but we still burn fossil fuels, and even though natural gas is cleaner, that, as I'm borrowing a statement from one of my coworkers, puppies and kittens don't come out of that stack. I mean, there's still emissions. So something we do need to think about. And I've only been just doing this for a few months, so I'm trying to get into working with that. So I hear you, Tony. Don't worry.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So, obviously I'm seeking to help, right, and to serve as a connector, and I know Alex brought up more resources and like more focused resources, funding for sustainability efforts. What other tools would be helpful in the work that you're doing that we could focus on as a state that could be shared statewide? Because I know like you're tracking, there's metrics, there's analysis, with all the federal funding coming, it just would like to throw out like what other tools and other resources would be helpful so that we can keep that in our brains as we're starting to think about the federal resources that are coming and how to direct those resources. Or you can think about it.
Take some free money, but no, just kidding. I'll think about it. Hopefully everybody else will. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some things that we would like to do differently in DOA. I don't know if
it was actually
will do that.
Close to the same, maybe.
had a portion of that, Alex. So there are things that you would like to do differently, but
Yeah, I mean, Tony's point is well taken. I mean, it means that we need to convert all our steam lines over to water, right? I mean, that's the first thing. But our plants are falling apart. So I think his point is well taken, right? So how does DOA get more resources to begin to look at pathways towards getting us towards carbon neutrality? Because our current plants aren't going to get us there. But our current plants need massive investments. And to Tony's point, is that what we ought to be doing? Should we still be having these big central plants? I don't know. It's clear steam probably has to go away, right? We're not going to solve all our problems with solar or wind, but no one at DOA is doing any kind of long-range planning in this area. In fact, we're being encouraged to just fix what we have now and band-aid it, which is what Tony is saying we should not be doing, and he's right. So how can DFD get the tools and resources it needs to be part of the solution about moving the state towards 2050? Because it's not just the university. You got a lot of prisons and hospitals and office buildings that are in the same place we are. Some have central plants, some don't. We are more central plant specific, but I mean, Pete and I are staring down the barrel of a really big number to get our plants where they ought to be. And I don't know if that's the right thing to do. But we do need to keep you open. That's our problem.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, one of the benefits of steam over the last 100 years, 50, 60, 70 years at least, is that it is a reliable way to deliver heat to buildings in a campus setting. Part of the problem, though, is, and this is my view after working with the DFD for the last 35 years, is that the structure of the DFD is built to support things the way we do them today, the way we've done them for the last 30 years, 50 years. And it's hard for the people that are in the middle of that to step outside it and say we have to do something drastically different. It's just, it's problematic for them because that's the way they've built their identity, and that's what they've done. And it's been with the idea that we're going to deliver the best service that we can to our campuses and the people that occupy these buildings. We're going to make sure that they never get cold, that they always have heat, and that it's done in a way that puts that at the highest priority, instead of saying we're going to set a larger goal to go from where we are today to a decarbonized solution. And that's we have a deadline of 2050 for that. And oh, by the way, in order to get there, we have to do things differently. We have to not strand assets. We have to set plans in place, and each campus is going to be a little bit different. So what does that look like? And how do we put those plans together? And then how do those plans have teeth as we do our capital planning? And how do we prioritize that as something that is as important as the built environment for people to be able to teach? And, and there's all of these conflicting things, and they're all really important. And it just seems to me, from my sort of perspective on all this stuff, but it seems like it's real easy to sort of brush this energy decarbonization, climate impact thing to the back burner when we're talking about how do I set up my lab. And okay, I get it. I mean, but back to the DFD folks, I think they're so ingrained with the way things are done, and there doesn't seem to be an organizational structure in place that says we need to change this. There isn't somebody that's a permanent decision maker that is either able or willing to say, okay, from here on out, every project has to be looked at to see whether it contributes to or detracts from the idea of decarbonizing our campuses. I would say that that's an important thing to do, but not everybody feels the same way. So But I think that's part of the problem, is that the DFD is an entity that has created reliable, functional working environments, and that's been the focus, as opposed to what we're talking about now and reducing our climate footprint. And they can go hand in hand, cost money, which means maybe we need to start thinking of more creative ways of paying for things. And it'd be helpful if we had a supportive legislature, which, you know, is a whole different conversation, but.
And I've heard whisperings of energy planning in the last few years, but it's going to take leadership, it's going to take new financial tools. But Tony, I love how much you can speak to this, because it's going to ultimately take looking at the viability of our plants and what we're investing in now. That's a space that UW Milwaukee is about to get into with enacting our climate action, carbon and resilience plan, and the viability of drawing lake water when we need more cooling and temperature of the water is rising. So I guess the question is, you know, it's individual campuses and we have individual needs, but how do we look at this as a system and be particularly serious about it in our goals and our funding?
Are there tools, Maria, that would help with the cost benefit, the analysis, the energy, the fuel look, that would be useful for evaluating these sorts of things, right? I mean, are there, can the federal funds be used to give us that technology where, you know, we can plug into it and you can run those numbers and those evaluations? That would also be helpful.
Yeah, that's certainly something I can explore, and it's not just it's the system, but it's also the enterprise, right? So someone brought up a point earlier that it's UW system, but it's also corrections, and, you know, what can we do to kind of catalog all that we have and where we can make change. So yeah, I think certainly that's something we can explore and see if we can bring some dollars in for that. Yeah, sorry, he's fed up with Zoom meetings as well, so.
Dave, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so one thing I want to say in this process that I feel like you've heard alluding to, but hasn't really been drawn attention to, maybe specifically, or if it was, I missed it. Well, like one of the things that I think about with particularly around our planning process, is that the long-term planning is very short-term. Like our long-term planning is like 6 years for a system at its furthest reach. And yet many of my colleagues on the call have things that they're dealing with that are 29 years from now. And so, you know, I think one of the thinking about the metrics or what can be done is, I think it would be interesting for someone to do some long-term capital planning on the state and system level to be like, okay, this is where we need to go for 2050 to decarbonize, as a reference guide to check off against these other 2, 4, and 6 year capital planning processes to see, like, how are you doing with aligning with these longer term visions and goals of where we want to be. And I think, you know, to go back, this would be a great job for someone in a sustainability director position at the system level to help facilitate. And then it would be a great metric for people in capital planning and for the state to be able to say, okay, this is where we need to go. Your proposal for this building is either supporting that, staying neutral, or working against it. And if it's working neutral or against it, then you've got some things to start working on to say, like, okay, well then maybe this is a little bit about what Tony was talking about in the stranded assets, where it's like, then we can't do this because you're not thinking far enough down the field. And so I think that's just another thing to consider in terms of potential work or responsibility, is like, we need someone on the upper levels to be looking at this 30-year planning window that many of us on this call think about on the regular, and be able to use that as a template and a guide against some of these shorter long-term planning processes of 4 and 6 years to help maybe make some better decisions or more informed decisions about how we're going as a system towards these sort of larger, longer range targets.
So this is going to sound a little strange, Dave, because I come out of the planning world. All of you are supposed to have a master plan. And that master plan is supposed to be way longer than the capital budget. We require a 6-year capital plan because we're required to by state law. By no means are any of you limited to 6 years, nor do we expect you to be limited to 6 years. In fact, I'd love to see a 20-year plan out of each and every institution. So Dave, that's what we expect you to do before you get to a capital plan. And I'll be honest with you, most of you don't do that. Most of you don't do long-range planning, and it infuriates my team because we expect you to do that. To your very point, what are we trying to do and where are we trying to get? And it is really hard to know, am I putting a roof on this one and 3 years later I'm blowing the building up? Because there isn't any long-range plan going on. So you give me a 6-year plan. If I had my way, I'd ask for a 20-year plan. But by law, I just asked you for the 6 because that's what the statute requires me to do. I want you guys to think long-term. I also want you to have the ability to change a plan if you need to, right? Stuff happens, right? But that's, Dave, that's where our group expects planning to be at the institution. The downside of that is if your academic programs change, then your plan's out of date before you know it. But that doesn't mean that you still can't do long-range planning. I come out of the integrated planning world where you work with the academics and you work with the finance guys and you do a long-range plan because you can't do everything in 6 years. So I'm sorry if you guys think that the 6-year plan is the hindrance. It is not meant to be. That is a capital budget request we have to submit. It should in no way hold you back from any kind of, if I'm trying to get there in 2050, this is what it looks like. So I worked for an architect a long time ago when I was really green, right? And I go out on the job site and the contractor's trying to change out all the building materials. You know, the usual thing, oh, yeah, this one is cuter, right? And it's of course cheaper and quicker and all those things you don't want it to be. And my boss said to me, remember what the goal is you're trying to get to. And that's the framework by which you make decisions. So if you have a 50-year plan or a 40-year plan or a 30-year plan, then I'm hoping that all of you, are not you, but your university is using that as the framework by which to make plans. And I know each of you are different and your capital planning teams are all different. I get all that. But gosh, Dave, I hope the 6-year plan was never meant to inhibit that, never meant to be a barrier towards long-term thinking.
But I think the difference is that coming from you all, it sets a different standard of expectation. So if it's me at the sustainability level in my office going and telling our facilities director and our facilities planner that, hey, you got to put a 30-year plan together about how we're going to get to carbon neutrality, they're going to go, oh, okay, we'll see, maybe we'll get to that. When that comes from people who are controlling the budget that's coming and somebody says, hey, by the way, in 3 years, you need to have a 30-year plan because we want to review that for shorter, that gets a whole different response because of the level of authority that it's coming from. And so like, you may be required to ask for 6 years, but I also would say like, does that mean that that's the only thing you can ask for? Like, can't you ask for that then if that's what you need to make better decisions? Because inevitably from a planning perspective, my facilities planner and my facilities director will be much more keen to follow through on a project around long-term planning coming from the people at the state than they will be coming from me. And I can tell you that based on a whole variety of facilities-based projects I've gone through and worked with. So, I mean, I agree with you, it shouldn't be a hindrance, but it also isn't, it's not advocating or actively promoting for more. They look at it and go, okay, we need to provide 6 years, here's your 6 years. Where if there was a request that came through that said, provide something for 30 years, they're gonna go, oh, okay, I guess we got to do this for 30 years for X, Y, and Z reason. So
you've given me something to think about, Dave, because we have asked for longer plans and we don't generally get them. We get sort of like words on a piece of paper that don't mean anything, by the way. That's not a plan, right? We have a lot of people who think if they give me a list of things to do, it's a plan. That's not a plan. That's a list of things to do. And part of the challenge that we ask each of you is what happens if you don't, if we don't do this plan? but we would like more. So, you know, Dave, maybe I might be heartened to be a little meaner in the capital budgeting process. We've tried to be careful here because the resources at all of your institutions are down. The amount of planning people you have are down. The cooperation you get from your academics is hit or miss mostly, right? You have some hits and some misses, right? Sometimes they want to cooperate with you, sometimes they don't. If you dangle a shiny metal object in front of them, they're probably super cooperative. It does require a village, right? I mean, if we're going to put together a good capital plan and a good carbon neutral, whatever your words are, it requires the entire university to come together. And we hope here and encourage you to do that, but we know that's not happening. I can see it. I can see it in the stuff you give me. It's pretty evident. I have to wait until the next president comes before I can begin to have a bigger conversation with more people and more chancellors. It's not going to happen under this current president. That's not his focus, right? So I'm willing to have these conversations. We've tried to have them before. And your planners on your campus, they want more attention too. I mean, I know there's some physical plant directors on here. You guys want it as well. I can't help all the silos in each institution, but you give me a lot more to think about, a lot more for Pete and I to talk about, and more to pick on Tom over.
This is excellent. I see one more hand up, and then we'll probably conclude. Brad?
I was just going to add, you know, Alex, I totally hear what you're saying, and I would love to see, you know, all the campuses have these longer range plans as well. I'd just be curious to know from the folks who I can kind of see right now, who are sustainability directors or coordinators, how often are you asked to be a part of master planning, or can you have a show of hands of regularly doing that? So Madison and Milwaukee, right? Like are asked to be a part of their master planning process, right? Their capital planning process, their space planning process. I think part of the problem is we aren't being let into the room. We are not being brought to the table. I'm really trying to like not get heated about this, but like I've brought this up to my administration for a while. You know, like we all want this like long-term planning. We all want to decarbonize. We all want more funding. We all want this stuff. I'd love to see all of that kind of get into the same stream. But we've got to be at the table. And I'd love to see a carbon and resiliency plan serve as the 30-year plan, serve as the 50-year plan. Right. And I think there's a way to do that. And I think you're absolutely right, Alex. It takes a village. It is going to take faculty and staff and executive facilities directors, right? And all of these people to come together to make this stuff happen. But I think right now, you know, those silos are still up. And I'm not quite sure what else to do other than just say like, hey, we're over here, and I work with my colleagues all the time in sustainability cross system, and we want to make stuff happen, and we want to make this easy for everybody.
Well, I want to use some of your words here, Brad, to close out. This conversation might be breaking down more silos than I have seen in my time. So I just really want to thank you, Alex and Pete and Maria, and all of my peers who work on this so hard. This has been incredible. And Alex and Pete, I'm sure you'll be hearing from us more, and we will follow through with your requests. And I think that you've gotten a really good sense of the broad view and things that we're digging deeper into and where we're at. So I really appreciate the time very much. And we are now on to our next session. So Brad, as the host, I will hand it back to you to conduct our business.